Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintus, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to be successful. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm for the game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Patrick Askeles for introducing us, and also the Deconstructor of Fun podcast, where I like to hear Laura. Today we have Laura Taranto with us. She has 14 years of experience in the game industry, primarily centered around casual mobile games. Her journey has covered a spectrum of game development phases with an emphasis on growing live titles. She joined Big Fish in June of 2021, and she took the helm of the hit game EverMerge and now leads their new game development. Prior to her role at Big Fish, Laura worked at Scopely, King, and Wooga, where she had the privilege of working on titles like Tuscany Villa, Heroes Saga, Peril, and Diamond Dash. Laura also contributes as a writer and podcast host at Deconstructor of Fun, a source of game industry insights, and sometimes rants from Crush. Let's get started. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
I want to start by talking about your own career path and your journey to get into games.
Sure. It was a while back. So I'm from New York City, and I always wanted to work in games. I didn't know it was actually a career path until much, much later. When I went to school, there was really no game development jobs, I think, as we understand them today. They just it was mostly console, mobile, casual mobile gaming hadn't really become a thing yet. And I knew I'd love to find a way to make games. So, for example, I really wanted to make like Final Fantasy games or a Nintendo game, but that just wasn't possible, and those studios were not in New York City. So I ended up applying to a producer, an associate producer job at a company called Arcadium. The founder and CEO is Kenny Rosenblatt. He's awesome. And they took a chance on me. I had previously done a little bit in like marketing. My degree was in foreign languages and literature. So they took a chance on me, and I ended up joining Arcadium, and I started as a producer making some of their smaller web games. So Flash was still the engine du jour, and we built out basically games for different companies, large companies that wanted either a website of games that they would host or little Flash games that had their brand in them, these types of smaller games.
And can you share more about the in-between? Where did you go next, and how did your role evolve? I listened to this great panel on how careers are not a straight line, and I think that's always really important to highlight.
So it evolved. So I started as a producer, and I was project managing a whole bunch of different projects, and it kind of stuck. I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking to do. This is the right thing for me. I was there for 2 years. I knew I loved working on the games themselves. Building kind of web arenas was fun, but I actually loved the game design, and we ended up working on some games for Warner Brothers. We built a game for the Vampire Diaries. It was a television show on WB. And then I ended up I knew I wanted to stay in it, and I ended up on a whim taking a holiday to Europe, and was like, oh, I love Europe. This place is great. I'd love to live and work here. And at the time I didn't realize, but looking back, that was when mobile wasn't quite kicking off yet, but there was a huge developer community in Europe for Flash-based games. And this was the time, if you think back, when you saw we were playing Bubble Witch Saga on Facebook games. And this was at the height of when Farmville was big. So it was that time. So had really wanted to move to Europe. I ended up making a list of the top gaming companies at the time. put together how big they were by impact, what games they had, and then ended up applying to Wooga because they were huge at the time. They were one of the best companies out there. Applied, got the job, and next thing I know, I had a one-way plane ticket to Berlin, Germany to work on Pearl's Peril. And then from there, it was just I was in it. I couldn't possibly dream of doing anything else. Ended up going to from there, I worked briefly at a company called Mind Candy in London after that. Then went to King London. Also worked at their Scopely London studio. And then ended up joining Big Fish, was working at Big Fish from London, even though they were based in Seattle. And then at one point, after a year of kind of working, like kind of I don't want to say overseas, but I was working basically with a remote team. I was London based. My team was Seattle and California based. I ended up moving to Seattle, moving back to the US. So that was very high level of my journey.
Yeah. I like that you made a list of where you wanted to work and then categories. So that's such an organized producer thing to do.
I recommend it to, there's a couple people that have asked me like, well, where should I work? I really want to break into games, or they're like, I want to make a change in my career. And I'm like, have a really clear idea of where you want to go and understand what that company is working on. And I think it's much easier to look at you just to put it down and to basically prioritize it. I mean, interviewing takes quite a bit of time. You have to understand what games they're making. You need to play them. You need to study them, figure out what roadmap you'd want to build around that game. And so I think I think it's easier to stay organized and just basically go through a checklist and figure out, okay, this company is in the right location. They have the right type of games. They're the right size, or they have the right, or they're like the culture. Yeah, I find it easier that way.
I would think so too, but you would be shocked. I think I talk to most people and I ask them where they want to work and they say, gee, I don't know. And then I ask them what's important to them. And sometimes they know that, but most people really don't have a clear list. I always like to send people to
Yep.
gamedevmap.com.
That's a very useful tool for finding studios.
If anyone doesn't know, some saint, do you know who maintains it?
Actually, I don't.
Okay, some saint maintains a website called Game Dev Map where you can go and you can filter by anywhere in the world, and it will show you by country, by state, what all of the game companies are and what genre of games that they make. It's a really good way to discover.
And it's been around for a long time because I remember it from way back when.
I remember the day in recruiting, I started game recruiting, and my coworker's like, hey, I just found this website called Game Dev Map. And we're like, this is the best thing ever. So thank
Mhm.
you. I should find out who maintains it and then have them on the podcast.
Yes, great idea.
Can you share a little bit more about your role at Big Fish? I'm not sure if you can say much about what you're working on right now, but maybe working on EverMerge.
Yep. So, I joined initially as a product director and to look after the EverMerge roadmap. So to figure out what features to make, what we usually do everything KPI based. So if you're going into any type of game, you're figuring out, okay, what features we're going to build in this game to hit usually business objectives. So that was what I was going to be doing at on EverMerge. And then there were some changes. I ended up taking over the project. So I had a co-leader. Her name was Kristen Overton. She handled the kind of the production side. Then I filled more of the GM title, where then I was determining what we were building, why we were building it, and then trying to get the KPIs where we wanted them to go. So yeah, a lot of it was looking at EverMerge. If you played, it's a merge game. It's not dissimilar from like the most popular merge games are like Merge Dragons. Right now you have the grid merge games like Merge Mansion. And it's not dissimilar. You're merging things together. You're uncovering a linear story. There's a lot of pieces and there's a big economy behind it. So there was a lot to do. And a lot of it was trying to uncover, okay, what makes this game tick and how do we make it, how do we lean into the things that players like and make it even better. So a lot of writing documentation and specifications and then putting it into roadmaps and presenting roadmaps.
And how do you, I'm going to ask how you do your job, but that's not a good way of phrasing it. But can you walk me through the process of really figuring out what the players want, getting player feedback, figuring out what makes sense to do next, studying the market? Tell me more.
So every company does it a little bit differently, and where I think Big Fish is very strong is they have their parent company Pixel United has an amazing insights team. Some studios use insights teams, some studios don't. What our insights team does is they do a lot of surveys and a lot of speaking to players and player groups to be able to basically to put together a report or some sort of insights to understand what motivates players from the qualitative side. So, what are they saying they like about the game? What are they saying they don't like about the game? So, part of what I do is taking that data, if we have it, which we had it we had tons of it, and then looking at the actual quantitative side and figuring out where are the players are saying this. Now, what are players actually doing?
Yeah.
And then combining the two and figuring out, okay, so for example, they might say they hate this feature, but it's actually performing really well. So there's something that in that feature that we built that they really like, or vice versa, where they say they love a feature, but it's not doing well. And then figuring out, is there a way we can change it so that players still love it, but then it also makes sense from a business perspective. So I feel like a lot of what I do is listening, observing, and then kind of formulating hypotheses based on all this information about what we can deliver to what we can deliver to players that we think they would enjoy.
What percent do you think of your data, like players say, I love this feature or I hate this feature, is really real? And how much of the time do you have to unpack that it's something slightly different?
Oh, it's a lot of time.
Okay.
Well, I think it's tough, right? For if you're a game maker, and I'm making an assumption here, but when I play games, I deconstruct them as I play them. That's just I'm like, oh, I know this feature. This is like a daily retention bonus feature, or this is blah blah blah. But players don't have that language, right? So they'll say they like something, or and it will need some sort of layer of translation. And there's certain things like in my experience, whenever if you want to understand how players respond to something in terms of spend, um, a lot of that's self-reported, and most people don't remember how much they spend. They're not going to know how much they've spent on certain features or certain games. They can give you a ballpark, and then sometimes they say they don't spend, and then they do spend. So I'd say that you can use it to discern what they like and dislike. That's easy. Not good for having them kind of dig into the why of that. Sometimes they can explain it, sometimes they can't,
Yeah.
and for whatever they say, that needs an element of translation. So, and then 100% for spend. I think personally my least favorite questions that are asked are like, would you spend on this feature? Because a lot of times they may say one thing and then it's just not accurate. And in theory they may say they want to do something, or they would play this, or the hypothetical, but that stuff never translates well. That you have to use the quantitative side for.
Your job's like being a psychologist, kind of. It's like human psychology. What
A
do you
little
say you
bit.
want versus what do you really?
Yes, it's kind of uncovering motivations. And I honestly, like, I think we've debated this even on I know we've had this conversation on one of on the Deconstructor of Fun podcast before, that you really need both. I think that companies that are really good at one and not the other are missing just a huge side of the equation. And it's just important to really have both of those. So you want your business performance, you want to be looking at definitely patterns in the data that you're seeing, but then you also want to be able to marry that to what players are verbalizing.
Is there a way that you could train your players to give you better feedback? Is that a big consideration?
That's a super interesting question. I think that there's like services like Playtest Cloud, great company, great CEO. I think players that kind of sign up for those services where they know they're testing games, they probably get a little bit better at using specific vocabulary, or explaining what they want, because they do it more regularly. But there's
Yeah.
actually something that is really helpful about seeing the raw reaction from someone who actually is not familiar and not from games. When we I was thinking back to a time we did play testing, we did focus group or something like this, and it was so interesting. We spent so much time putting into the art, into the title of whatever the feature is, and it's fascinating when you actually watch someone play it, and the title could be like right there in front of them, and they're calling it something completely different. So they'll be like, this feature is called like lava climb, or I'm just making this up, and they're like, yeah, this really the red map feature, or this red blob feature, and you're like, It's interesting. That was their takeaway. It doesn't either that, but I think that in itself is a very interesting learning. So I almost wouldn't want them to have better language because I want to see like what their natural reaction is.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I will not name names, but I know there are certain really large companies that really don't do a lot of outside play testing, which I think is so interesting, and they don't gather the data. So we'll see what evolves over the next few years. Do you have some predictions for, I don't know, just different tools that will take off? Or do you think most companies will get an analytics group or they'll learn the hard way? I mean, some of it must be sort of luck too at first. If you're not, I mean, you're a scrappy startup, you don't have the analytics group, you don't have a lot of data, or maybe going by intuition.
So yeah, a lot of it is intuition. And then I think the only way it gets better though is you make a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, and then you need a way to measure it. Otherwise, I believe that you can't get better without that. There's just
Yeah.
it's too hard. You need to learn to train it. In terms of tools, I mean, I think playtesting is great. Again, it needs the element of translation for sure.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of general industry trend tools, I mean, I think AI is going to be AI in a whole different number of applications in terms of like how you could use it for personalization in terms of having the game automate more of for the player what they're seeing and what they're playing based on how they're responding in real time. So there's that application. We talk a lot about in the actual production phases where it could save time by helping produce assets for games, helping produce writing for games. There's a lot of content applications. So for tools that I see, I think playtesting is always going to be important. So those tools are not going away anytime soon. And then anything that starts to make things easier so that you get more done in less amount of time.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about shifts in mobile game development since you've been in it and what trends you see?
Oh, shifts. I mean, okay, so like high level, I specialize, like my favorite genre is puzzle. I love match threes. So I know there was, if you actually look at the history of match threes, it started with like Bejeweled and then goes all the way through and then to the match threes we see today. And the most popular one, Royal Match. And then you have your behemoths like Candy Crush. So you can sort of, if you actually were to map it out from like shifts in from like a design perspective, you can kind of see how the engines evolved, the match three engines evolved over time to something very, very simple to the kind of that fluid, buttery, smooth feel that you have today that you see in Royal Match. And then other shifts in mobile game development. I mean, I think the shifts that I would hope to see next, and this is just my personal read, and it ties a little bit into what I'm doing now. There's a couple things at play. I think for certain genres and certain companies, cross-platform play is going to be incredibly important. We see that with like MiHoYo, how they're available on console, they're available on mobile. That more ways to play. I think that's going to be a shift that happened is going to be continuing. And then also for how do I phrase this? I'd say that I think there was like there was a wave of risk taking in games. Like early on, I think in like the 2012s, which was very early mobile, to like the 2016s, where they really started combining different metas with different engines. And we saw the rise, like Blast get really popular at that point with Toon and Toy Blast. And we saw a lot of interesting new games come alive. And some of them worked, some of them didn't, but there was a lot of new, fun, fresh things. I feel like now it's been, and again, this is my own perspective. I think what I've noticed more recently is I think there's been a lot less risk taking from the developer side because games are much more expensive to make. So we've been seeing a trend where there's not as many risks being taken. People want a guaranteed success, or they want to play it safe. And I mean, not that vocabulary should be scrapped from everyone's use, because no game is ever safe or not risky to make. Even if you make something that's a fast follow of another game, there's still no way you can guarantee that it's going to be a success. So what I'm hoping to see the next shift be is we've kind of seen this kind of low risk, a lot of safe quote unquote safer bets coming into the puzzle and casual genre now. What I want to see and what I hope to see is the shift towards innovation and being like, okay, if we want a hit game, we got to think big. We can't just be a small incremental step change. It's going to have to be a big swing. And I think I think in this, one of my favorite phrases now has been fortune favors the bold. And I think those that are going to be trying new things and pushing the boundaries are going to be, that's going to be a really interesting space to play. And that's where, I mean, that's secretly where I want things to go. But I also think there's going to be a shift there as well.
Yeah, I think it's a hard balance. So like if you're people always talk about being too early, right? We were just too early for this.
Yep.
And so I think like different, but same but different, maybe.
There's an element of of reading tea leaves. There's one thing, you know, I tell people when if they ask me for advice or whatever, what I try to do is I try to play everything, because you want to see what players are playing and try to figure out what they would want next. There's this quote about, I think it was from Wayne Gretzky, about you want to go to where the hockey puck will be, not where the hockey puck is. And I think that's in that. A piece of advice for anyone that I think is incredibly important for if you want to make a hit game is figuring out what players will want to do next, not what they're doing now.
I play a lot of games.
Yeah.
Market research.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about user acquisition and the different ways people are thinking about it today versus the last 5-10 years?
Well, we all know the changes that Apple made in the name of privacy, and it has made it more difficult to do specific targeting for certain players with certain ads, and then be able to track and measure how those players are performing, and then how those ads are performing, and linking it basically all together. User acquisition for a lot of genres, I mean, I can speak more to the puzzle ones, is very expensive. So how are different companies tackling that? Well, there's a couple things. One, you see like kind of the rise of mini games. So a lot of ad creative that does well is those mini games are like save the king or save the person, figuring out ways to actually put those those little ads, those mini game ads into the game itself. So some of the newer games, I think Tactile has a new game where they have a whole bunch of little, like, I think they have what's it called? Like a 3D match engine in it. And so they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make ads that work well, be representative of the product? So linking that back in and finding different ways to basically create ad creative. And then also is leading into new ways of payment. So I think integrating ads like in-app ads is going to be more important, as is exploring things like off-platform payments. So finding other ways to expand and increase your overall revenue. So I think those are, and then the third way would be looking at what things work in your game and finding and experimenting with different ways of monetization in general. So we know that, the puzzle pass, the battle pass works well. What would be the next stage iteration of that be? So I think there's a couple things, but it has gotten very expensive to bring a game to market.
I feel like people get kind of sick of the same monetization feature at a certain point, though. Wouldn't you say? Like it works for X amount of time and then something new is needed?
Yeah, I'd say so. Some of them, I think it depends on the feature and how well it's integrated into the core loop of the game. If it's kind of like a side bit, yeah, I can see like there would be some sort of novelty effect where it would be really interesting initially and then it would decline. But ones that I think new features, like if a battle pass or a puzzle pass is properly integrated into the core loop, I think that could be a sustained revenue change for sure. It depends entirely on the execution and how it's done.
Yeah, I'm sure there's so many nuances. What I guess is the most successful game that you've ever worked on? And you can define success yourself. And do you have any stories about the journey in making it?
So the most successful game was probably Farm Heroes Saga, because it's earned more than $1 billion in its lifetime revenue.
Wow.
I also loved working on that game. That was the team was wonderful. I loved working at King. I felt like it was a great company with a great culture, and that came through in the products. So they hired, they hired really smart, nice people. And I just remember going to work every day, excited and looking forward to working with those people and making features, because we had so much opportunity. There were so many ways to learn. King is great at knowledge sharing. And yeah, it's also really, I can't think of one of the things that motivates me in general is when I was living in London at the time, I'd be on the tube or on a plane ride and you see someone playing your game. Like I would see someone playing Farm Heroes Saga and I was like, I found it in the wild. This is great. And then I remember I can't remember where I was flying to, but I was sitting at the front of the plane. Well, not in first class. I was just in the like row 7 or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
bulkhead. And I went to the bathroom, and as I came back, and as you walk through the plane, you can see what people are watching on their tablets. And I remember seeing like, I think every 5 rows, someone was playing a king game. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is like, you see, what we put down on paper of what we think is going to be fun to play. And then you actually see it in real life, and you see more than one person playing these games that you've had some sort of, impact on. I think that, if you're at a little bit, I said most successful, I think I turned it into, that was probably the most meaningful, rewarding experience. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a measure of success. I mean, I think, most games, I think you want a team that's worked together before, that has good synergy, that's good energy together. And I just have very fond memories of working with wonderful teams at King and when I was there. And so that's, for me, that I would say it always gets lumped into most successful, because it was also the most rewarding.
Yeah. I think personal fulfillment goes hand in hand. What do you think King did that made it such a great place to work? Like, for any of our listeners that want to make their companies a great place to work, or want to suggest things to their company in an appropriate way, how can they repeat what King did?
Oh my goodness. That's the $1 million question, right? Everyone wants to repeat that.
It is.
So there's actually, there was one guy I worked with at King named Kim Nordstrom, and he just wrote a book about this.
Oh.
Yeah, he went around and interviewed all the CEO, like tons of CEOs, tons of founders, and was trying to put in words and writing to uncover the recipes to creating a successful company. The book comes out in January. I haven't gotten a pre-read yet, but I did read the first draft chapter, and I feel like that is what he is trying to suss out. And when I spoke to him, for me, I think what I've noticed is what I felt, there's a couple things. One, I think who your leadership and co-founding team is incredibly important. Like the two of the people that were the co-founders and leaders at King when I was there, I had so much respect for them. Their hearts were in it. They were all really smart, and they were all really focused on like kind of their area of the business and making it the best it could be. So that, I think, is the keeping focus, making sure people are doing the right things, and leading by example, I think are all part of the recipe to having a successful company.
Yeah, and I feel like when you have that successful internal workings, it just bleeds out into a successful product, and you can't really have one without the other.
I agree, because there's smaller companies that you see. I've dabbled a little bit of contract work here and there for other companies, and I've seen where it happens where the co-founder does, or the leader doesn't practice what they preach, or there's all these kind of bad patterns of behavior, and that just, it has a negative impact on your studio and your game. And I think that you really want to aim to be, you really want good values, and you want to be living those values. And I think the King leadership at the time I was there, 100%, they had a lot of integrity, and they were very bright. And yeah, I think that makes a really big impact on how your company or studio performs.
Yeah. Even figuring out your values at the beginning is so important, and then measuring everything against them.
Yep.
On a more negative note, I would love to hear about a time things went terribly wrong in a game, or yeah, things were getting off track, and how you were able to navigate it. Games are always so life or death.
I feel this feels like an interview question. So from the production side,
Yeah.
I mean, for any producers listening, so when games tend to get off track, it can it's either usually a schedule, or it's the creative vision isn't finding its audience. So it depends on which one it is. I've definitely had games schedule slip, and you just got to go in there with scissors or a knife and just start cutting things apart, reprioritizing, figure out, okay, do we need this feature, or how important is the deadline? Is it an arbitrary date? Is it a date that's tied to marketing? Is it a date that's tied to something else? So figuring out what your key components are, and then reacting appropriately to it. So in cases where we've had a big marketing spend push that couldn't be moved. We just had to descope and reprioritize some of the features and really figure out, okay, what do we need right now to make sure that this feature or this game has the right things to hit its objective. So what can we cut that is something we can remove and we don't think it's going to have an impact on major KPIs we're trying to hit or the overall experience. From creative standpoint, I think that's actually tougher. Because there's when it comes to iteration and innovation, it's very hard to put a time frame on it. You don't know when you're going to strike gold or hit lightning or whatever it is. So that when there's a creative vision that goes terribly wrong, that is much harder to like schedule around and to understand what a timeline to a fix would be. So I think in the past I've worked on a game where we knew what we wanted to make, and we were working, and we started playing the build, and while it was in flight, and realizing we are not hitting on the core motivations of what this audience wants. There's just no way. And then it's going back and figuring, okay, what needs to be changed? What parts of the game need to change? Is it the art? Is it the look and feel? Is it the combination of all of these things? Do we have the right feature set in? Is it like how we're trying to teach behaviors and actions in the game coming across clearly enough? So then it's really going back and sitting with, the creative team and being like, okay, well, how do we make this more, where do we want to go? And what is the delta between where we are now and where we want to be? And then what do we need to do? What do we need to change? How much do we need to change to get there?
That's a very easy explanation. Like it sounds easy in the way that you explain it, but obviously
it's not.
No, it's the hardest thing. But like, hey, we're here. This is where we want to go. What's the gap? No, that sounds terribly complex. And games hard. I mean, you're dealing with so many people and their art and they're creative and
yes,
yeah, there's some characters.
Yeah. I think with that, but with kind of that creative, I think this goes back to the importance of understanding who your audience is, and this is where like playtesting can come in handy, or getting kind of your key segment you're going for is understanding what they want, because that needs to tie into what you're trying to achieve. So some people call them game pillars, some people use them, some people don't use them. But with you do want some sort of like stake in the ground to understand who you're building for and why. And you always need to go back to that and make sure that it's still relevant. None of this stuff is in stone, right? I mean, every document I work with usually is a living document. You might have one key aspect of the game might be social in the beginning, and then you realize this game should not be social, and it's fine to change it, but you at least need to know where your stake is, even if you need to go back and like move it later.
That makes sense. I think that could translate for a lot of businesses too, though. Like, who are you selling to? What are the things that they want? Do they want the thing that you're selling, right? Even for my business.
Exactly. And it ties back into everything. So a friend of mine is trying to start his own business, not gaming related. I think he was like getting very frustrated with me because he wants to build a content strategy to build up his social media presence. And I said, okay, who's your primary target market? And he's like, well, it's this group and this group and this group. I said, all those three groups, they are different people with different needs, different challenges, different motivations. You're going to have to speak to them differently. So you got to pick what's your main one. Start with your main one. And then that you can have secondary and tertiary as well, but start with exactly who you want to go after first. And I think that it's still true. It rings true also with games.
Yeah. Businesses are all the same in fundamentals. Games are just a lot more complex than
yes.
I feel like. Can you talk about a time that you felt imposter syndrome? I'm going to explain why I'm asking this. I always like to ask this on my podcast if I can, because I think it's important for people to understand that most people feel this. Maybe everybody feels this. And I think people put successful people on a pedestal and don't understand how they got there. And it's so powerful to hear that everybody feels this way.
So I'd say that the older I've gotten and the longer I've been in the industry, the less I've felt this, but I still feel it today. I just feel it to a different intensity and a different frequencies.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I felt it all the time because you don't really know, especially with games, you don't always know. There's no necessarily right answer. So you have to lean heavily on your experience. And then if you're early and new into your career, you just don't have that much experience. So And you can, I used to read everything, and it's helpful, in theory, but in practice, it also doesn't sometimes always work out as you think it would. So then you start to doubt whether what you know. The way I've approached it is, someone said this to me once. I think it was one of the guys I worked with at Arcadium. They had some really wonderful people, and he liked to approach everything as to understanding why. So if something goes well or not well, it should never be, oh, that's terrible. I did such a bad job. It should be, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. And going with a kind of going in with curiosity as your forefront instead of fear. So that I make it sound like I picked that up in a day. No, it took me years to get to that place where curiosity was at the forefront instead of nervousness. But I think I still feel I still get bouts of imposter syndrome, especially when I'm surrounded by like really, really smart people. And I'm like, wow, maybe I don't deserve to be here. Who am I? I'm not like, I don't need to be like, I'm not as good as these people. But what I try to remember is everyone has different journeys and different perspectives. So when you come to the table, it's also about bringing those a varied and a diverse set of ways of thinking and ways of acting and ways of working. That's really the main. That's really what you want. It's not just bring. You don't want to. Oh, you don't. It's not the right thing to always be right. That's not. That doesn't. You don't want. I mean, it's nice being right, but and I think having that imposter syndrome is having the need to feel like the expert at all times and never be wrong. And there are times for that, but a lot of times that's not what you want. You really want to go in with the right attitude, with the right values, and with the right and just being I want to say like an easy person to work with, but that's not exactly what I mean. But you want to go in and be like, okay, how am I raising the bar for everyone I work with, and how am I bringing all these good values and everything and all of that to my everyday. And I actually think that leaning into that and making it more about how can I bring my best self and bring out the best in people versus feeling like I need to be the expert on a pedestal, and remembering that it's not just about feeling like you're entitled or you're in the right place at the right time. It's a lot more than that. And I don't know, that's what I kind of lean into when I feel like I'm in the wrong place.
That's good. I always just think about sharing my authentic experience and being myself. And I learn all kinds of little tidbits from people in the places which I wouldn't necessarily expect to. So I think people always have learnings from you. And if you, right, like you said, if you're genuine and if you're trying your best and you're not a jerk,
Yeah.
people will like that.
People like that. Yeah. And I
Don't be a
actually
jerk.
think there's a lot of, I think a lot of times kindness and authenticity can be better than someone who's incredibly intelligent, except not very nice. No one wants to
Yeah.
work with those people. I mean, you,
Yes.
people remember how you make them feel more
It's
than
true.
anything else. So
Yeah, and if you're trying hard and if you say you don't know something, but you'd love to learn, someone
yeah,
taught me that early in my career. You can say, I don't know, but you can just say, I don't know, and I will find that out for you.
exactly.
I want to know more about your podcast journey and give it a quick plug, or you can, but Deconstructor of Fun. Can you share more about how you connected with them and what the podcast is if anybody doesn't listen to it? But I hope they'll
So Deconstructor of Fun started as a blog, and it was literally Mishka Kakoff deconstructing games, literally deconstructing fun. And then, so when I worked at Wooga, that's how I met someone named Adam Telfer. We were both product managers. And he was writing, I might be butchering the story a little bit. Either he had a blog or he wanted to start a blog and ended up connecting with Mishka. I think they started doing some sort of work together. And then I had stayed friends with Adam throughout my time at Wooga. And then we're actually still friends today. And this was like over 10 years ago. So Adam started working with Mishka. The blog got bigger and bigger. And then at one point, I was actually at a very low point in my career. I had just left this company. I was hired to do one thing, and then I came in and they were like, "Nope, you're doing this instead." And I was like, "Absolutely not. I'm contracted for this thing. I'm not going to do this other random thing you want me to do." So I was feeling pretty deflated, and I messaged Adam. I said, maybe I could just, I have a bit of time. Maybe I could just write a blog post for Deconstructor Fun and do a deconstruction of a game. And I did it for Heyday Pop. And then I did it for a couple more games after that. I started getting more and more involved. I started, taking over the casual mobile segment because Adam used to cover a lot of it, and then he moved into console. And I just really loved it. So I just started doing more and more of that. And I went to their first Deconstructor of Fun event conference in Istanbul. And I ended up, I wasn't part of the speakers panel, but I knew all of them. So Mishka was kind enough to be like, well, why don't you just come crash this dinner? And I was like, are you sure? Like, I'm not, maybe I shouldn't crash the dinner. And he's like, yeah, why not? It'll be fine. So I crashed the dinner. I was sitting at one table with a bunch of guys I knew, and they actually had to move me. And I was like, oh no. Okay. And I ended up being sat next to Eric Kress. And we just started chatting, and I was kind of running my mouth as I'm running my mouth now. And he was like, you should be on the podcast. And I was like, I don't know. And then I started as a guest. It took me a while to find my feet. And if I want to say I had imposter syndrome, it was hard. It was really hard. But then, then I ended up being a recurring host, and I tend to cover a lot of the mobile casual market. A lot of games which Eric would call mice nuts, but I actually think they're in the journey, what I explained before about all the incremental changes that make up a larger shift in the mobile landscape. What I love is trying to pinpoint which ones I think are going to be, setting off the new branching path to yield to do something else. Again, he calls it's too small fries. These games don't make enough money. I'm like, well, they're important too, because they usually become a stepping stone for someone else to come in and do something, a way of taking it that is going to be a commercial success. So that's how I got involved. It was a bit random, and crashing a dinner in Turkey.
That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
So you have two different, you're on Twig.
I'm on Twig, This Week in Games. Yep.
And then Mishka, is it always Mishka who does the other one?
So they do other interviews, and I think it's Jen Donahoe, Mishka, and Ethan. I don't know if Ethan's still doing it. He might be, but they do, and Eric does too. Actually, almost all of them do one-on-one interviews as well. I'm the only one who doesn't, and it's a time restraint thing.
Yeah, I can understand. So Deconstructor is always so informative for me to learn about what's going on in the game industry and all the trends, and hear experts. Sometimes you are all experts, but other experts as well come in and share their 2 cents. You have so much info on the current state of the industry, and I know you research every single week. We're recording in December, and this is going to come out in Marchish, but can you talk about the future of the game industry maybe after March?
Well, I covered a little bit earlier when I was talking about where I think the shifts are going to be. I think that for, at least in casual mobile, I do think that we're going to need to see, I think my read, if I was going to take the temperature of what those players want and what they don't want, is yes, it's a red ocean. I actually like to call it like a purple ocean, because while it's very saturated, there's always opportunity if you find the right opportunity. And I think that my take temperature taking for players right now is they have their slate of games that they like and they enjoy. They're always open for new games if you're bringing them a unique experience. And what I think that eventually, hopefully, people catch on that, those incremental changes that you either do a slightly different mashup, or you make one small change here that used to cut it like 5 years ago, 8 years ago. That's not going to cut it anymore. And I don't think that's what players want. They're not going to cycle your game into their playing suite of games unless you're really taking a bigger swing and giving them this new novel experience.
That makes sense. There are also so many games, the most games ever to pick from, right?
Yeah. Yep. So, and this is why I call it Purple Ocean, because it's about, there is an opportunity to find what they want. So I think, like, looking at, there was the Mahjong tile match mechanic that's really popular that Spike Games has done a great job making Tile Busters. That is scratching an itch. That is something new, feels novel, it's polished. Like that's in terms of, like, that is incredibly different from a match 3. Like they're different categories, but I think those are the bigger swings you want to be taking if you're going to be making games.
And if somebody was going to listen to one deconstructor or a few deconstructors, what would you say the top episodes are?
Okay, so I'll give you the most popular one. There was, I think, when we were covering Unity, and Eric went on a rant, one of his many famous grouchy rants. So those tend to do very well and tend to be very entertaining. And the ones where we argue, I think those those are the fun ones. I'm trying to think of we did a recording recently for looking at the top games in the various game award categories. I thought that one was fun to do. I like the ones where I actually am taking apart a game, or were okay. So what game was it? Oh, I was talking about Match Factory, and I think it's a new game by Zynga, and Eric was like, "Why are we talking about this game?" And then we got into an argument about why I think it's important to look at not only really successful games, but these smaller games that represent a change in strategy for the company or represent some other change that we're going to be seeing a shift in how mobile casual puzzle is going to be. And when we argued about that, I thought that was quite fun. Yeah, so any of those episodes, they're probably within the last 15 episodes would be my recommendation.
I think the arguing ones are entertaining too. I like to listen to them on my drives. You've worked in game roles and non-game roles, and you worked for Chelsea Football Club. Can you talk about the difference in your role from games to non-games and product in and out of games?
So games, you don't have to like there's nothing you have to do about a game. Like it's not like it's a banking app. You need to be able to find this thing, or it needs to have this sole purpose. You're about creating fun. Like it's a little bit more escapism. You want someone to feel like, they pick up your game and they play it and they get some sort of emotional positive reaction. You're rewarding them and making them feel good. That there's a degree to that you want in, like, my banking app is Chase. There's a degree to that I want Chase, but I don't need like kudos every time, I make a deposit. And so it's more about, I think for me, like, it's both cases, like you want very low levels of confusion. Like players need to understand what to do when they see what you have, or it has to be very easy to teach and remember. And I think that's almost exponentially true for any type of non-gaming app. Like the function becomes incredibly important. Like it needs to work, and it needs to be very specific about what they will and won't do with it. In this case, so when we were doing a little bit of product research, and we were looking at market insights, and we were looking at trends. We were trying to discern where there was I think there was also a larger element of trust needed. So for things like if you're going to do something in healthcare or banking, you need to know, especially with adoption, you need to figure out how people are going to be finding and using your app.
I was curious if they would help each other in the end. Like if having both experiences would kind of make you think about games differently, or make you think about making a non-game product when you've worked in games differently. I know Elon Musk, not to tout him or anything, but he thinks that hiring people in games is a great idea for all of his companies. Question mark on how he's doing in general, or people's opinions about him, but he's very successful.
He's very so okay, and I'm biased. Completely admitting to I'm biased. I actually think the gaming experience. I actually think gaming is harder. I think the gaming experience is more beneficial to non-gaming apps than vice versa.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because when you go into games, it is a completely different way of thinking. Like it is much more, you need a lot more creativity in how, and it's just, the art matters, the characters matter, how you tell those stories matter. It's much more emotional.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But maybe, you could take some of that, if it's not so serious like banking or healthcare, into your non-game product and make it more of an emotional experience. I guess it would depend.
It depends. I think Duolingo was doing something. They were trying to take gaming elements and then they like copied them directly and none of them worked. Yeah, you can't do that. That never works. So you have to figure out what you're trying to change and what your current users are doing, then figure out what the game feature you want to take over is, and then it's going to have to be adapted. There's no way around it.
Yeah. It's true in life too. You can't just blatantly copy something. You have to kind of make it.
It doesn't work.
Your own. For people that might want to break into the game industry, could you talk about any advice you might have?
So I think this is true breaking into a lot of industries, but gaming in particular, you need to be persistent, and you're going to get a lot of no's before you get a yes. I'm very grateful to Arcadium that they gave me a chance, because I had no gaming experience, and it's really hard to get gaming experience unless you're, in university sitting, making your own games in your dorm room. And that I didn't do that. I'm not a coder. I'm not an artist either. So that was not something I could have done. And I applied a ton of places and I got a lot of no's before I got a yes. And so if it's something you really, really want to do and you're passionate about, like, don't give up. I mean, I still, once in a while, when I'm feeling particularly nostalgic, I will apply to Square Enix, even though I know they're never going to take me because I don't live in Japan. Most of their development studios are in Japan, but I think it's about um, my personal mantra is do lots of research, learn as much as you can, learn, and then you need to keep networking, keep talking, keep trying.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. And maybe find a mentor. I know you are a mentor. What makes you decide to mentor somebody? What do they do that makes you say yes? Because I'm sure you have a lot of requests.
Funny, I actually don't.
Oh,
I've had I've mentored three people. One has been more successful than the other two because we were very what he wants to do is similar what I do, so I can actually help and weigh in.
yeah.
Where it hasn't worked out well is it's a completely different discipline. So there was one girl I mentored where she was an artist, and this was through like a side program. And so I was able to help like do work on her CV, do cover letters, that I could do, but I couldn't help her become a better artist, right? So
Right.
that so I think it's about finding you need the right level of compatibility in terms of what you can offer versus what they need. Um, where it also hasn't worked well, and this is I think I talked about this in the Women of Games panel, but I offered my time. I offered to look over anything she wanted to send me, and she just never took advantage of any of it. And I was like, and then she'd be like, I say she'd go to an interview or apply, wouldn't get a call back or wouldn't get the job. I said, okay, write down all the questions they're asking you,
Yeah.
send me everything before, if it's written, send it to me. I'll proofread it, and then based on what they're saying or the feedback, then we'll walk through it after. But let me do a pass. Let me at least help you. Didn't take advantage of any of that, but then didn't understand why she wasn't getting what she wanted. And
Yeah.
I just like banging my head against the wall. I was like, I don't know what else to do.
Was it
So
you that said that you write down all of the interview questions that you're
yes.
ever asked? That is so smart.
Yes, because one, it's dual sided, right? So if you are interviewing people, one, it's really good to have a list of questions always ready to go.
Yeah.
Two, if you're going to be looking for work, the questions are all very similar. And then if you get a really odd, different question, like you just get better and better at answering them. So
Yeah.
yes.
That's great. It is a lot of practice. And I think it's so fun to be on both sides. When you're an interviewer, you're a better interviewee. Have one last question before I ask it. I want to point people to your company's website, Big Fish Games, and also the podcast, Deconstructor of Fun. They have a Slack channel that is delightful. They have a podcast. Follow along. The last question is from Wiggy. They have a whole program built around I wish I knew X at Y stage of my career. They call them cheat codes for the next generation, so they don't have to learn the hard way. What cheat codes do you have that you could share?
Okay. So this was there were certain points in my career where I really struggled and I could not figure out why I wasn't getting to the next level, either in promotion or responsibility, or why I felt that I kept being overlooked or not appreciated. And one of the guys I worked for, who I absolutely adore, uh, he said to me, perception is as important as actual skill and what you're actually doing. You need to make sure that the perception that people have of you is the one you want them to have. So if people think you're anxious, and at this time that's probably what they thought, I was anxious and worried all the time and nervous. And to be fair, I was those things. It was early on. Um, I had to sort that out first. And I wish I had known that sooner, because had I known that, I would have gone in with a very different approach and a different way I was carrying myself and acting and behaving. And that was actually just as important as me having the skills I had. So I know it sounds a little bit negative. It's not meant to be scary, or it's more meant as there's reality, and then there's a way you see you, and then there's the way others see you, and how others see you, I hate to say it, is very important. um and I there's roles we all play, and I think it's understanding. I think it's a lot about like understanding the person I want people to see me as. How do I, if I want someone to describe me, how do I model that behavior so I get that description?
Yeah. how do I bridge the gap between where I am now and where I want to go?
Yeah.
Just like product. We've been talking to Laura Taranto, Senior Director of Product, Head of New Games at Big Fish. Laura, where can people go to contact you or learn more about you?
Where can I go? I don't have a website. You can find me on LinkedIn, or if you're part of the Deconstructor of Fun Slack, I'm there. I think those are the two places I normally am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.